This is House Planning Help, episode 385. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in new build or retrofit. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is architect Kirsty Maguire. We welcome her back to the podcast with exciting news. She's completed her own house build, so we want to find out everything. We'll do that in a few moments. We often start the podcast by sharing a resource, and we thought, well, since we've been with Kirsty and the purpose of heading up to Scotland was to make a video about the Seed, then this is what we should share, because the Seed in itself is an amazing project. We've done a podcast on it before, but I've never visited. So as I've mentioned recently, it's always slightly different. When you've seen the project, you've been there. And for example, it made me appreciate how co-housing can work at different scales. It may be a small scale co-housing, but that doesn't mean that there's not a larger community around that. So I thought that was really interesting. And then it's just lovely to see the location, all so peaceful and such a great project. We focused on reuse in the podcast, but there are many, many ecological aspects to this project, which we go into. So I'll put that link into the show notes today, the video of the Seed, now an award-winning project as well. Let's get to our featured interview with Kirsty Maguire, who I've known for many years, but I couldn't be more happy to see her achieve this ambition and build her own house. So I started by wondering when it was that she'd first thought about building a home.
It's really hard to pinpoint when I crystallised this into an idea about this is what I'm going to do. But I remember, certainly as an architecture student, I was thinking about it as we were going along and definitely keen to create a space for myself and somewhere that other people can come visit, potentially live here, be part of that world and that experience. But of course, you need some funds and you also need to know where you want to live. And actually, I think that's one of the hardest things, was pinpointing a place where you want to be, but also that has a plot available. So that was a journey that took, good 20 years, possibly longer.
So where did you want to be and how do you decide where you want to be? Because I have seen this before when people have built houses, stayed there for a couple of years and then thought, actually, I'll go elsewhere.
Well, I think one of the important things is that it might be your forever home, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. And I think in this country, particularly, your home is your castle. And there's an element of that which, particularly if you're building it yourself, then you're maybe thinking that you're only coming out of it in a box, which is not necessarily a bad thing, although hopefully that's not imminent. But also, building a house can be a really enjoyable process. One of my set of clients had this beautiful terminology for working with us, and it was called dream catching. And that's something I suppose we do on all our projects, not just houses, but every type of project. People come to us with a dream, and we explore what that dream means to them, how we can turn it into reality, how that fits with some of the practicalities with the constraints of the site and budget, and then work with them to crystallise that dream. And that's something, obviously, that I've done for myself as well.
Going back to this location then, where did you settle and what were you looking for? And was the hunt a long time?
Yeah, so the hunt was a long time. And I suppose it's also a case of thinking about it seriously, but then developing your ideas, exploring different sites. So I looked in lots of different places. Probably the first site that I looked at really seriously was in my grandmother's garden. So she had this beautiful garden just outside Kippen as part of her home. And there was a building on it, a sort of outbuilding, which could have been replaced with a house. But at the time that she died, which would have been the appropriate time to be looking into this, as the family were deciding what we were going to do with her home, then unfortunately for me, that wasn't the right timing to do the project. But it was a useful process to go through it, looking at it and developing it. So I think each time you look at it, it's a stepping stone in the direction of it. So again, when we're speaking to clients, sometimes they've already got a plot, sometimes they don't, and they're at the earlier stages of that process. So for us, helping them to look at plots where maybe they don't buy it, but it's part of the process, and it's maybe 1 or 2 or however many plots further down the line. It's actually an interesting process to go through, because each time you develop a bit more about what you want, what you need, what's important to you, and also how you think that might change in the future, because none of us have a crystal ball, but having that flexibility is ideal. So time went by, I set up my own practice, did various other things, went on some adventures, and got a bit more serious about plot hunting. And at the time I was living in Newport-on-Tay, which is where I live now. And some other plots came up, had a look, thought about it, did some sketches. None of them really floated my boat.
So let's just talk about that for a second. So you do your sketches. What is it that's going to make it really appealing?
Well, again, this is a bit personal, but in this particular location, the views are stunning. So being able to find a place like that could take advantage of those views was really important. But the other things that were important to me, being able to walk to the shops, be part of a community, not have to drive everywhere. Again, these are things that are particularly important to me. Other people have different priorities in their plot finding. And there's really not many plots like that available. But I actually spotted this plot when I was in Ushuaia in southern Argentina. And it was advertised on the local property sales website. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. But at the time, I'd just closed down the business for 10 months and taken a sabbatical. And I was about to go to Antarctica. So this maybe wasn't top of my list of priorities, but it was rumbling away in the back of my mind. And I came back and I still didn't really know where I wanted to live, because I could go anywhere. But as time went on, I realised that, this was a great spot. It was a really challenging site, steeply sloping, north-facing site, amazing views, but it turned out someone else had bought it. So I was most disappointed. And the fact that I was so disappointed, that was really telling. But it came back on the market and I managed to buy the plot, and here we are.
So the actual process was not too tricky. Obviously, you missed out once, but you weren't in a fight with lots of other people, or were you? And you just put in more?
No, I wasn't in a fight with other people. Or it's interesting, lots of people have come up to me subsequently in the village and said that they looked at it as well. But because it was a very tricky site, very strict restrictions on size, views, in which direction it can look, parking, and therefore the total number of bedrooms that you can have, all of those put a lot of people off. There was an existing planning consent on it, but it was absolutely dreadful. So I think that worked in my favour.
So what was here? What was this plot?
This was a garden, and it was attached to one of the adjacent properties. It's a little bit hard to find out exactly the history of it. It's number 5, and the ones on either side are number 3 and number 7. So it's always been a building plot. But whoever had, I think, the house next door must have bought 2 plots at the time. I think they always intended to build but never did, and ultimately it got sold.
So what are you going to put on this site, and can we run through those challenges again?
So the challenges, so topography. It's extremely steeply sloping. It's 3 stories of level difference between the front and the back, and there's rock underneath. It's quite narrow. There's properties on either side, so we couldn't have windows on either side of the property. There's rights to light. We had to make sure that we weren't overlooking any of the other properties. And as I say, from a Passivhaus point of view, it's north-facing, and most of the views are to the north. So that gave a different challenge, but I like challenges.
So what are the next steps then? You've got this planning consent. Is it very easy to change to what you want, or was there a bit of back and forth?
So once a site has planning, it is much easier to adjust the planning. Although because this is part of a street and it was always allocated to be a plot, as long as you keep within certain parameters of the local plan, then in principle, it's okay to have a house. It's just what it looks like, how big it is. There's height restrictions on here as well as all the rest of it. So really, to create the shape of the house, plotted all the restrictions and filled in the gaps. One of the other things is, of course, not only do I not want to overlook other people, I don't want them to overlook me. So there's a big picture window in the sitting room where Ben and I are sitting right now. And architecturally, you might say, oh, we'll put a floor-to-ceiling window. But actually, we did lots of sightline analysis, and it's raised up. The sill of it is raised up about 400 millimetres, because that gives a huge amount of privacy. So people walking along the street or even in the house opposite can't see in, and likewise, when I'm sitting on the sofa, can't see out.
Yeah, it's a nice touch, and it certainly is a window that you go and gaze out of, so that has worked very well. You mentioned about look is something that the planners might be concerned about or whatever. So explain what you went for as your design, if you can describe it in words, and whether that was tricky at all or not really.
So it's a 2-story, most of it's like a house-shaped house. It's a rectangular box with a pitched roof, but it runs perhaps the opposite direction to what you might expect. So the ridge of the roof runs front to back rather than side to side along the street. And then there's essentially a box on the side of that which has got the stair and bathroom and utility in it. And it's an upside down building. So upstairs has open plan living, dining, kitchen with a partial separating wall, which has, again, holes in it so that you can sit at the dining table in the south-facing sunshine next to the garden, but you can also see the views all the way to Dundee.
So some of the passive house challenges, you've talked about north-facing, and you've got this big picture window that we've got here. So what does that mean for hitting the targets and the amount of solar gains that you've got coming in at the back of the house?
Well, at the moment, we've really only got one south-facing window in this building. We've got lots of things that you might say are not optimal in terms of passive house. So we've got roof lights, because we can't have many windows in the walls along the length of the building. We've got this big open airy space as well. So cathedral ceiling. Again, if you're just designing by numbers, then you wouldn't necessarily do that because you've got lots of extra volume to heat. So maybe we had to have the insulation very slightly thicker. The form factor off the top of my head is about 4, which many of the houses that we're working with, because they're detached buildings, it's roughly that. So it's not going to make a massive difference. It does add challenges. Half of the building is submerged into the ground, which also doesn't help because most of it's facing north. But what we've done for the certification is heat load rather than heat demand. So I should really know the numbers off the top of my head.
No, you shouldn't. Not necessarily.
That shows it's just working. But I think it's about 20 kilowatt hours per metre squared heat demand, but 10 heat load. And I did actually look recently at how much energy we actually used, and it worked out, I think, about 13 kilowatt hours per metre squared per annum in heat demand. So a lot lower than PHP had suggested. I think in part that's because during wintertime I tend to run it slightly cooler, maybe 19 degrees rather than 20. That's just a personal preference. I'm not sure that makes up for all of that difference. Maybe, I don't know what the other things are, why it would be a bit more efficient than we expected, but I'm not complaining.
Now, while we're on this subject, so we've got skylights that you mentioned you wouldn't typically have in a passive house. Well, you could have them in a passive house, but you've got to be a little bit careful. So can you explain what the difference is of having skylights versus if you were just going to have a window in a wall?
Because it's facing the sky, you lose a lot more heat than a window that is vertical, i.e. a normal window. And also, it's quite hard to shade. So you get a lot more sunlight in summer. I don't know if that's necessarily a problem so much here because we've got some, but we don't have loads. It's not like we've fully glazed the ceiling. And also it works extremely well for static ventilation.
So most of the time it's cool outside that you can just release any excess heat, or how have you found it? Has it just been comfortable anyway, or have you had any challenges?
It's been fantastic and I'm really pleased. It was interesting because when we first moved in, I was also running the practice from room downstairs. And my colleague who was working with me at the time, Alice, we'd been working in a really cold, drafty office for years and came in and both of us were just like, this is amazing.
You forget so quickly, though. This is the trouble.
Yeah. So, and all the things that everyone has always told us, and we've taught other people, and we sell this amazing comfort. It's really hard to understand it until you've experienced it yourself. And even though I knew it from going to visit people or visit other buildings, living in it, it's just so different. And of course, other clients who we built these buildings for before I got the opportunity to build one for myself, again, they'd say, this is amazing. And we'd go, yes, that's what we told you it was going to be. But until you've actually lived this level of comfort, I think it's really difficult to understand how great it is.
Yeah, good. So it sounds like it's done well. All right, let's go back in the story. So we've got the land. What has come next then in pulling this off? Is it just an easy buy the plots and start assembling a team, or what came next?
I suppose that's my bread and butter. This is what we do all the time. So from our point of view, it was quite straightforward. There's really good consultants that we wanted to work with and who are part of that team. I think the hardest thing is making sure that you set aside enough time for my own project, because I was passionate about it. Of course, I really wanted to do it. But I remember, for example, going on holiday with some friends. We're traveling and there's me finishing off doing some drawings as we're traveling. Just because I'm passionate about it, I want to get something finished. But of course, this is my project, so I'm doing it in my free time. So that was certainly a challenge. But I guess I just loved it. It's what I wanted to be doing, and it didn't feel like a chore.
And what about all of the permissions and getting your building warrant and things like that? Is that a straightforward process?
So again, it's about making sure that you fit within the restrictions. So that comes back to those initial drawings where we're modelling and mapping those out. And that really helped determine the shape of the building. Of course, I always knew I wanted it to be Passivhaus, and I knew I wanted to use eco-materials. So from that point of view, some of these decisions were made. And because these are similar processes that we always do on a daily basis, that was quite straightforward. Needed to think quite a lot about how the building was going to look from a cladding point of view. And the area is quite eclectic. There's a whole mix of buildings, Victorian buildings. The one opposite is from probably the early 90s. It's a period piece, I guess you could say. The one next door is a little brown bungalow. There's also some really lovely new builds in the village as well. So it's a real mix. So we're fairly open in terms of opportunities for using different materials. But we did use different motifs from the buildings that are around. So actually this big picture window that we've been talking about, that is actually echoed in the building next door and some of the Victorian buildings which are across the street, as is the relationship of that with actually this pitched gable roof. So when you're in the street, what you see is the gable end. So the ground floor of the building is a ready story up above the street, and then it's 2 stories up above that to the ridge. And what we haven't described is this, like the living space where we're sitting and talking at the moment is a really big, generous space. So you could potentially, if you really wanted to, put a little mezzanine in as well. But I don't need any more space. So.
No, I think you can enjoy this space and you know what you're doing. And timber frame, is that the way we're going?
Timber frame is very traditional in Scotland. So it's a typical way of building. It means that the contractors, we're not building a spaceship. It's evolution, not revolution. And so that makes things a lot more straightforward. And just going back to your question about planning, I realise I'm actually not doing a great job of answering your question.
That's all right. I'm obviously not noticing.
But I think what's great there is then actually having a coherent story, making sure we're working within the parameters. Some of those things, it comes back to things like views, overlooking, which you can see as restrictions, but actually it's thinking about them really creatively so that when you're in the space, there are things that are positive. And also there was a huge amount of support for the building. So there's a lot of letters of support. Once we submitted planning, there's a lot of letters of support. We didn't actually get any letters of objection, which was fantastic as well. So that made a big difference.
Is that something you had to work on, or is that a surprise? Who has supported you?
I went round, made sure that the neighbours knew what was happening. That makes a big difference, and it's certainly something that we encourage because, of course, people are afraid of change. even those of us who like to think of ourselves as more progressive, if there's something that's being done to you rather than with you, it's a completely different approach. So I went and spoke to the neighbours, and they were very supportive, unbelievably supportive actually in many ways. The people opposite, they built their own house, and this house does slightly reduce their sunlight because of the steep slope, but nonetheless they were super positive and thanked me for thinking about them as part of this process as well, so that they do get some sunlight rather than it just being a big block which blocks everything out. But I think that's partly by engaging people in the process, but also just the type of people that they are as well, just really fantastically friendly.
And what about the Passivhaus modelling then? Did you get to where you wanted to be easily enough?
Because the restrictions are quite strong on this site, there's a limited number of ways that we could create the form of the building, i.e. the shape of it. And then it's about optimising the glazing. We knew that we wanted to have a really big window to the north to enjoy the views. We knew that we wanted to have some roof lights so that we could get east and west sunlight into the building, make sure it's light and bright. So there was a limited amount of things that could change, but it's really about making sure that the glazing was the right size in terms of heat loss, but we've still got absolutely enormous windows. The other thing, we want to make sure we're not overheating. So it would, could have been tempting to open up the whole of the south-facing gable end to glass, but we would have absolutely cooked. And that's where the PHPP is really helpful, because it quantifies, okay, it's an average, it's a crude tool, if you like, in that respect, but it gives an idea of where there might be a problem. So it's modelled to 0% overheating risk. And we've actually been monitoring it with Strathclyde University over the last year and a half now, and it's performing really well. So we've been modelling the house and the office, which we built subsequently to the same specification just outside, which is where I now run the practice from. And both of them are working really well, which is absolutely fantastic.
We did talk a little bit about you were going to be using timber, but maybe you can go into technically how this is going to be built.
So first of all, we had to dig out a lot from this site because it's so steeply sloping. And actually there was a really high wall. There was a 2.5 metre high wall along the street edge. So we had to take that wall down and dig out all of that soil down to street level to be able to make the parking area and the area that the office now sits. So that was mostly soil, but also a lot of rock. So there's a lot of work in that. And we were able to reuse the wall, though, in the gabions. And we also collected some more stone from other building projects around the village, and actually from a mason that we know who was taking a wall down outside my parents' house. So there's lots of lovely stories about the stone just outside the building. And also my dad carved a number 5, which we've built into the wall. And again, quite often clients come to us and they have particular things that they want to build into the building. And I really love doing that. But once we dug out, quite an effort, it's a isoquick raft foundation. And so then we built up the area that's built into the ground. That's actually concrete block retaining wall, which is insulated on the outside with a XPS type insulation. So that was all carefully put on and then backfilled. Obviously there was a tanking layer as well to keep the water out, which so far has been working well. So I built that up, backfilled, so the building is about a third sitting below ground. Then above that it's timber frame filled in with wood fibre insulation, and then a wood fibre sort of tea cosy all the way around the outside, and the same for the roof. So that helps avoid thermal bridges. And it's a way that we've built a lot of our timber frame buildings, particularly where we have to do stick build on site. Because it used to be that there were very few Passivhaus quality timber kits that you could buy for offsite manufacturing, OSM. But now there's some really good ones out there, and we've worked with them on other projects. We've talked before about the Seed project, and that one was done by Eden Insulation. That was really good. Lots of advantages to doing OSM, and we looked at doing that on this project, but because it's such a tightly constrained site, we weren't able to. So everything had to be carried up this steep slope, most of it by hand. So it was an absolute epic effort by the building contractors to do that.
And were there any challenges with putting this stick build up, or was it fairly smooth running?
I mean, there's lots of challenges to working on a steeply sloping site, particularly things like windows. There's a big ridge beam. Those weren't manhandled up the site by hand. I think this window that we're looking at is probably about 300 kilos. So they certainly weren't going to be carrying that up to, or even 3 stories actually, from street level. So there were some things that were brought in by mechanical means, but majority of it was not. What
are the dimensions? We need to give everyone a clear indication of this.
It's 2.5 metres by 2.5 metres, and it's a single, this particular window, there's no opening panes, it's fixed. And it's actually the same size as the window at the other end of the building, which is the south-facing one, which is a opening door and a fixed pane. But interestingly, because this is raised the 400 millimetres off the floor, it looks much bigger. And
it does, doesn't it? I would never have thought that's the same size at the other end. But I do like the fact that you haven't got any opening parts or divided mullions and transoms and all the rest of it. Does that make it actually cheaper when you want that size as well? Because it's just a solid piece of glass.
Cheaper might be a relative term. But yes, it does, yeah. And they're fantastic bits of kit, so it is well worth paying for good windows. But again, something that we look at when we're speaking to, these windows are from 21 degrees as they're now known, and they're wonderful. But we do speak to them and check about what's the maximum size that you can get on a normal truck without having to pay for non-standard transport. And so I think this probably pretty much is about it.
Yeah, that is a good question to ask. Now, when we start to look inside, going through first fix, second fix, what is it going to look like inside it? We know it's a box, but it's very beautifully decorated and thought out plan. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you were thinking.
So again, upstairs, it's this very tall cathedral shaped spaces. So there's no attic, for example. It's the main rooms go right up to the ridge beam. So you've got that big open space, lots of light. So we've gone throughout with an oak floor and quite simple detailing actually, with then interest coming in through, there's lots of plants. A local craftsman, Emmerich, made some really beautiful shelving and some built-in cupboards. And another craftsman down in Edinburgh made bespoke worktops. But then some of these items which are quite bespoke are offset by the fact that we've used IKEA kitchen for the rest of it. And it's a Howden's flooring. We've got absolutely bog standard things like skirtings, architraves, off-the-shelf doors. So it's about choosing where you spend your money, really, and to make the best impact and how that might work. So I'm pointing at a light fitting, which people can see actually from the street, and they all comment on it. It's a sort of yellow globe. I think that cost me about 20 quid. Whereas there's some other ones which a ceramicist made for me, which are above the worktop, which by light fitting standards weren't too bad, but they certainly were more than 20 quid. So it's again about choosing how you do it, and created a lot of the light fittings ourselves using coloured cable and actually using long drop cables for the lights. Even though it's just a cable, a row of them can actually start to separate the space. So it's creating different spaces rather than just putting walls up as a way of separating space, doing things that are much more subtle, creating layering, views. The second favourite window, although some people say it's their most favourite window, is actually one that looks out into a cherry tree. So the cherry tree is just a metre or two away, and there's 2 particularly beautiful times. On a day-to-day basis, the sunset comes through there, but on the equinox, it actually sets on that side, which is complete coincidence. I'd love to say that I designed that, but I didn't. But also the cherry blossom comes right up to the window. So you start to get this feel of the landscape, and the fact that even though we're in a village, it feels like you're in the treetops when you look out to the north.
What is the biggest learning of the project?
One thing I would say, and I was laughing about this with an architect friend when I saw her the other day is that I can't help but redesign it constantly in my own head.
What does that mean? Is that you would love to do the project again and do something else? Is that you think there is something better now that you've been in here, or what?
It's a habit, I think, is what it is. But I love it. I don't think there's much that would change at all. Obviously, if I started again, would I end up with the same building? Probably not. And because it was designed pre-COVID and life for many of us changed a lot during COVID, then actually where the office is now was originally designed to be like a sort of shed workshop. So that did change because it wasn't built with the original building or the main house. And actually that gave me the opportunity to expand it to as big as you could possibly fit into the tiny little squash site that it is. It's only about 38 square metres. And add a WC and so on. So that now we've got a self-contained office in a way that I would never have considered us building pre-COVID, because I always wanted to be in the city centre with completely different priorities. So that's been really interesting. That was a real change, even though it just was a change on paper.
Yeah, less of a commute as well.
Yes, I think I go horizontally about as far as I go vertically.
And what do you make of it all at the end of the process? How do you reflect on this?
Very pleased that I've done it. And the next project is the garden, because that still looks quite like a building site. That's ruminating, got lots of great ideas, and pen and paper have come out and they're now at sketch stage. So I'm looking forward to that part of the project now.
And do you have any advice to anyone who might be tackling a project and just looking to help them?
I think the first thing is, if you have a dream, then explore it. Doesn't mean you're committed to your project, but it does mean that you're not always wondering what if. And that's where architects can help you. So you might come along and say, I don't even know how to articulate what I want. Let's explore it. And that's a wonderful place to start a conversation with a client, because there's so many opportunities, and don't be shy about putting all your ideas on the table. And again, it doesn't mean you have to build every single one of them, but good architect will help you sift through them. You'll probably end up prioritising them. And it might be that at a certain point they might think, oh, that other little idea that's sitting over there, which is maybe in the second or even the third layer of priority, and we can pull that in and we can pop that in somewhere in a corner. And that's really, as an architect, that's really fun. And we really get to know our clients to be able to do that and create that relationship with people. And it's really special working with private clients because it is something for them, and they're really invested in that process. Many of them are very creative themselves and bring a huge amount to that conversation too.
And have you found living in a passive house any different from visiting all your clients and saying, oh, this is nice?
Yes, definitely. So I was living in a small 200-year-old flat before this, which has all the pros and cons that you might imagine, mostly cold and slightly drafty. Much as I liked being there, I can't really express without going into the technical matrix of how comfortable it is and how nice it is to constantly have fresh air. And as one of my clients once said, this was tongue-in-cheek, but they said, I don't like going to visit my friends anymore. Just because they don't have passive house buildings.
Well, there we go. And what's your favourite part of the house or favourite thing about the house?
There's so many little bits and pieces that I thought about as I was designing it, which layer it up. So views from different places, the interaction between different spaces, some of which are quite subtle and some of them are really not, like the big window that we've talked about quite a lot in this discussion. So it's quite hard to pick one thing out, but probably the views through the building, the fact that we can sit here and look out all the way across the Tay estuary to the mountains. And at the moment it's raining, but it's this lovely sort of silvery grey soft view, and then out the back over the to-be garden to the fields and the green and the trees out the back there, as well as actually looking up and seeing the sky and listening to the rain pattering on the roof.
Well, it's lovely to get to see it, and as I anticipated, I knew you'd do a great job. Kirsty, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Get more in the show notes today, which you can find at houseplanninghelp.com/385. You can review the key points in our summary. We've got photos of the construction. You can take a look at the design, the completed building as well. Lovely place. If you've got a comment or a question, get interactive. We'll give you social media links and, of course, point you to Kirsty's website, all at houseplanninghelp.com/385. My call to action is to check out the Hub, and this is the membership community that I run alongside House Planning Help, providing further assistance. Let's give you a couple of examples of things that we do. Ez Trezida has been with us for the last couple of years for Ask the Expert. So if you've got any passive housey questions, then he is the man to ask, and we compile a list and then fire them at him. We've got our courses, so we break down different parts of the process. If you want to get interactive with others, we've got the forum, or if you want to get interactive with me, my inputs, you're more than welcome to have it. That's office hour. And then some of the archive bits and pieces. For example, we filmed on a number of projects, and we've got a number of inspiration videos as well from different projects. So all of that in there. Go and take a look at what we offer, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Joshua English is my guest, and we're looking at the future of mycelium composites. Thanks for being there. Really appreciate it. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media. Content that matters.